Good morning, everybody. Isn't it just nice to start the day with a nice, wonderful, sad, tragic ending love story? Um, it's really hard, and I when I wanted to do the him and Goering story, um, it you look at these people from history, and they have all been presented so very stereotypical. You know, almost anybody from history have been presented in a very superficial, stereotypical way, and it's interesting when you start digging into them what you really find because a man like Hitler doesn't just happen. A man like Himmler or a man like Goering doesn't just happen. But of all of the historical figures, given the caricature we've seen him and Goering being depicted as in most popular history, and most of the things that we are being told are wrong. They're just outright wrong about what they've been saying about him, as they were about a lot of people. And you see a lot of the gossip and the rumors that came out of the Nuremberg trials, where the newspapers, both in the Allied and the German newspapers, who were at the time in 46 during the Nuremberg trial under the direct or indirect control of the Allied governments, the occupying powers. So German newspapers at that time would absolutely not going to write anything. Thank you, Mark Bakery. Anything redeeming about any of the people sitting on put on trial, but instead they would come up with the worst and weirdest gossip and rumors and chat about all the defendants. On one part out of self preservation, as a German newspaper allowed gracefully to be opened by the Allies. Uh, Certainly, they're not going to start taking up the defense. And that's why it was so crucial for Goering during the Nuremberg trial that he actually cleaned up his morphine addiction and straightened out, because he had several heart attacks after he had surrendered to the Allies. They thought he was way far overweight, and we'll get to how he got there. I was starting from the other end, I know. And uh, it's what's interesting about that is they actually cleaned him up and made him healthy. And we've seen kidnap stories in recent years of stories like that. But he was healthy and he was clear minded, and the defense he gave at Nuremberg was very eloquent, to the point where he redeemed himself for a lot of people that listened, of Germans. There were stories of airmen that were listening, sitting in camps all over in England and Germany and different places, that was listening to his speech, defending the actions he had taken and had known of, and that redeemed himself to some degree. And what he did during the war, given the fact that he didn't want to go to war, and certainly see the life he came from, he absolutely idolized his first wife, to the point where you almost feel a little sorry for the second wife, because well, we all know that he named the house after his ex-wife. He had a mausoleum built right across the road from their house, Kleinhall, for Karen, and I think one of the ships were named after her as well, one of his yachts. He loved that woman. There's no doubt that there was a heartbreak that happened in him that maybe one would almost think that desensitized him for what came after. Was, you would imagine, after going through everything he went through, and from having had grown up fairly well to do with things, being a proud officer, to ending up giving everything for a cause, betrayed, losing everything, being shot, ending up on heroin, ending up a drug addict, out of money, Hitler's in jail, being shunned by everybody, having to sell their furs, their furniture, everything they had, just to survive, begging her family for money. I mean, you can imagine that must be a period of time that definitely defines who you become. So when he finally makes it, and he finally has everything, he get money from Lufthansa, he's got his title, he's in the parliament. Now he can finally give her the life he wanted to, and then she dies. I mean, that it's just somehow, if it hadn't been Hermann Goering, it would probably be one of the most romantic stories of all times. But we couldn't ever. If I changed the names out and I read this about somebody else, you would all want to make the opera. But so when he finally gets into power, when Hitler gets into power, and things really start, and they have a say from 33. Well, this is the mindset he's saddled with. This is the heartbreak he walks into this with. So somehow it becomes understandable to some degree. And yeah, he collected diamonds and gold and money and opulence left, right, and center, and sort of lost his road. And then he was on and off heroin throughout the war as well. At one point, Hitler told him to lose weight and knock it off, and he did for a little while. But drug abuse is what it is. I mean, heroin is addictive too. If you, especially if you don't have a physical ailment for it to have a reason. And there's a lot of very tragic stories of great people who have died of drug use. And when it comes to what did he know during the war, I mean, he kept up his back channels with the British. And we'll get to that in later episodes. These episodes take a long time to make because there's a lot of details, a lot of photos. Fortunately, it gets a little easier to find photos. Thank you, William. Thank you. As we get past 1933, I hope. And now we're going to go back to do Himmler and Goebbels and then Goering again. And I think I'm going to do Mussolini as well, just because there's a lot of things about Mussolini I don't know. But every time I see how he's depicted, and that's sort of a little bit how I pick these people, is we look at what we have been told about them. You do a basic search for Mussolini, and you will see all these ridiculous photos and all these exaggerated poses that sometimes he did, granted. Don't know a whole lot about the man. I know the basics of him, but all I see is the today's portrayal. And I can't help but to think, well, maybe that is as wrong as everything else we've been told about everybody. Ribbentrop would be an interesting person to do because, well, he wasn't particularly well liked by anybody. I mean, I honestly think I should do all the key defendants at Nuremberg, and obviously Churchill. I definitely want to do Franco, and I was thinking about Mussolini as well because I think there must be more to his story than we've been told. And again, we have to, the same thing with Goering, we have to look through the things they wrote about him, which was what I started talking about actually. Yeah, they all seem to hate each other, which was a bit of the reason, the way Hitler did things. He set them all up to, instead of working together, then working against each other one way or another. He had multiple agencies and offices tasked with the same order, which means now you have several entities trying to complete the same mission. So of course they'll run into each other. Rommel we can certainly do, but yeah, the whole way, top-heavy way that Hitler ran the Reich and had people work against each other instead of with each other, everybody biting for power and incorruptus. Thank you, brother. In pounds, yay! I appreciate it. The complete mismanagement of Germany was probably the single largest reason why Germany ultimately lost the war, and certainly the way they did and when they did. You saw that the infighting within the Air Force. And, Milch has. I'm probably going to have to do Milch as well because, as the founder of the savior of Luftwaffe and the one man who built the German Air Force, he fell out with Goering as well, although he wouldn't testify against him at Nuremberg. But you looked at what I was trying to say 3 times now. You look at what they wrote about these guys, the most insane lies they wrote in the early 40s, plus all the propaganda that the Allies have been told, and has never been cleaned up. Thank you, RS. I appreciate it. I'm scared to death, and I have to start doing the other ones. That's why I scream out to you guys for photos sometimes, but it's really hard when you're not actually don't know what the text. You don't know exactly what I'm looking for. Sometimes I don't know what I'm looking for until I actually start doing it. Um, Joseph, thank you. Damn it. Um, and it just it's always been for during war. There's propaganda on all sides. Look at the discussion we're not having about how Ukraine happened today. But after the war has ended, it is up to historians to start cleaning up what was said and done. And it seems that that is being done less and less. We can't even agree on what really happened during World War One. We can't even agree if that was a popular war in England or not. We can't basically we can't really agree on World War One if it really was the assassination of the Archduke that funneled World War One, because I really don't think it was. We've all been told that was the catalyst, but really, when you start looking at the headlines and you look at the writings amongst people at the time, half the people in Europe, they didn't know who he was, and the ones who knew who he was didn't really care. Certainly, nobody wanted to start World War One because he had been assassinated. So why did World War One happen? Just a small thing that gets lost in history, and the same thing you have here in World War Two. You have all these people and all this gossip that has never been cleaned up. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to do this, because especially like a man like Hermann Goering, and I think all of us had at one it's all of us have at one point or another been desperately heartbroken. We have all suffered losses, and one can only imagine the life the two of them lived and everything she gave up, and for his loss as he goes into 1933 to the final election where they take power. One can only imagine his mindset, because here he has an empty house to come home to. They finally got a nice place and a nice house, the corner elevator where he straight to the parking garage where Milk at Lufthansa would come bring him cash money, and he'd go down and meet people, and they would literally, the best of the American politician tradition, give them cash money in brown envelopes. And he had everything going, and here he could finally get home to this nice place, and this room he decorated for her, and it's all empty. I mean, there's not a whole lot of partying or alcohol or anything that's going to make up for that. And I think that is, I don't think he wanted to be rich and powerful for him when she was alive. I think he wanted it for them. And now that he finally got it and she was gone, it ran off the rails. And I think that is the Hermann Goering we see in the 30s and 40s. Is now he's, of course, he married 3-4 years later. He married a German actress, not, I think, because he desperately he wanted her, wanted to marry her. Yes, they were having an affair. He had an affair, and that's fine. But Hitler insisted that they marry, because very interesting. Hitler always insisted everybody around him lived a formally proper life. He was very prudish when it came to those things, which is why Hermann, he married his next wife. She gave him the daughter Gudrun. No, it's not Gudrun. I'm sorry, that's Himmler's daughter. Oopsie. Actually, Himmler's daughter, Goering's daughter, became a very attractive lady. But he married the actress, and they had a child. And he didn't think he could have children after having been shot in the groin, which makes me wonder. He was practically also, when he was shot down during World War I in the airplane, he was shot groin adjacent. So, I mean, seriously, one thing is you lose the love of your life, but you've been shot in the groin adjacent twice. I mean, and you wonder why the poor guy's on heroin. But I guess that's not funny. I think this is what like a man's nervous laughter when it talks about bullets flying around your private parts. However, he thought he was impotent, and it was interesting when the Italians visited in 35 or 36. She actually, his new wife, told him that she was pregnant. So it was a bit of a surprise for everybody, including him. But still, he's living with a new wife and a daughter that he adored, as far as I can see. But you're still looking right across from his huge estate to his dead wife's mausoleum and a house named after her. It must have been so much fun. The next wife must have known that she was still woman number two, no matter how you twist and turn it. And again, I don't think the his second wife had the influence to get him run off the on and off use. Sorry, somebody shooting something. All right, don't know if you can hear that, but welcome to LA. Yeah, it does sound like gunfire. Oh well. Anyway, I haven't even gotten to the Ukraine yet, but I don't think she had the influence on him that Karen did. Karen most certainly had an influence over him, and I don't think anybody, short of maybe Hitler at the time, had that. Later on, yeah, I think so. I'm in LA; it happens all the time. Get used to it. Which is also interesting that the relationship between Hitler and Goering, I thought, was very. Don't worry, I'm armed. It was very interesting because they seem to have struck up um, a relationship, friendly relationship, from the very beginning. And certainly they did things for each other. Like everybody sort of fit in the opening days of the party, where, well, this guy has a car, well, he's a speaker, he has a printing press, he has a little bit of money, so they all sort of cobbled together how they could sort of work together and how they could help each other, benefit each other. And I think Goering and Hitler, both being World War One veterans, they had, there's a bond between the two. And I'm not sure if it was clear to Hitler exactly how much Goering went through, but I could certainly see why, when he came back, he wanted what he thought he was owed, and duly so, I would say. I mean, he gave up everything. They're just starting to build a little career with his new wife from Sweden, and they sign up for Hitler's party. And it's interesting. An interesting note is Karen's father was also although Swedish, a National Socialist supporter, certainly. And you even see them in the family photo together. You can't see it because I couldn't Billy punch in, but she's actually wearing a little swastika. She was very much a supporter of the movement as well, as were, I think, a lot of people. And I think also a lot of people didn't know exactly where things were going, because it was hard to see in the 30s, where you have nationalism or communism to choose from, to see how either one of them, and I'll guarantee you, if the communists had come to power, then just as many people would have been murdered, just different people. You can't really win when it's either or. Oh God, her dad's name, I think, was Carl Baron von Flock. Don't ask me names like that. I haven't had coffee yet. But anyway, it's interesting to see how it all sort of got cobbled together until afterwards he came back. When he came back with her to Germany, started building slowly. He could have been a pilot. He could have done things, but to sign up for the movement, had sacrificed everything, and everything they had, confiscated cars, house, anything, and then got shot as well. And then on his own dime go to see Mussolini, who had no intention of seeing him. And I sort of understand why, but one would wonder. I would love to hear about the first encounter in 31, when Goering, or Hitler sent Goering to Italy. The first meeting between Mussolini and Goering. It would be hard pressed, if I put myself in Goering's shoes, to not still harbor a whole lot of resentment towards Mussolini. I see smiling photos, so I guess they didn't. But I think it would be hard to not have a little bit of resentment to somebody who I indirectly, Karl von Rosen, yes, could be blamed for why Goering was in the predicament he was. Um, so, you know, um, what's it? Anyway, what else we get? So now, now it moves on, and another thing is, regardless of his addiction, and certainly had a thing for opulence, and it will say also he bought a lot of art, and with a lot of things that well, he stole a lot of art, but a lot of it he bought at low price, but a lot of times he also paid overpriced, because certainly one thing was that the Goering never after that point never was out of money. So when he went, even in 40, 41, 42, 43, when he went shopping in Paris or Amsterdam, uh, there's a lot of, or he had art dealers shopping for him. The prices would be doubled because they knew it was for him, and he would pay whatever if there's something he wanted. So he also got cheated quite a lot of times when it came to art deals. And then, of course, there was other times where you see things in museums that he would pay for them, but it wasn't the fair amount, and it wasn't much by choice. But for a large part, a lot of the art he obtained actually was bought and paid for fairly honestly, fairly, without having looked into that yet. More details. We'll get to that. But I think it's again, it's a sign of him just wanting more, and he didn't want the war. He was not on board with Czechoslovakia. He kept trying to have yet backdoor channels with the Czechoslovakians for the longest time, until Hitler finally marched in, because he didn't want the war. And when they went to Austria in 38, I'm sorry, that wasn't 38, that was 36, wasn't it? He promised the Czechoslovakians that they would should had nothing to fear for, that Germany had no intention of invading, because that's what he truly believed. And he did the same thing with Poland afterwards, where he tried to negotiate a peace with the Polish until Hitler told him to stop in that invasion. He kept trying to negotiate with England way up until 1942 through back channels, until Hitler was informed that he was told to knock it off. He tried. He tried to negotiate peace for the longest time, because while he'd been to war, I don't think he had a whole lot left to prove, and now he wanted the good life, which I think is fair enough. He wasn't the one pushing for a war. And now when he was finally saddled with it, I think that's one of the reasons why the morphine came back in his life, as did the excessive shopping and art and diamonds and things. Because exactly, Goering knew that war's bad. Well, war is not. Yeah, actually, war was really good for business, but it probably wasn't good for him for what he really wanted. And I think he just dove into the shopping. He didn't go to his office. He neglected his business, because I think he went back on drugs as an escape, just like the excessive shopping was an escape from what he didn't want. And Hitler had paddled the country into a war, and he couldn't talk him out of it. I don't think he was in any which way. That's why I think he checked out in many ways mentally, which is what he was accused of having done. And I think that's probably justifiable, because he didn't want to. It was like, you tell somebody to do a job they don't want to do, they're not going to do it very well. And then if he, I don't think he was against the Anschluss. At that time, he was promising the Czechs that it would never go any further. And even with Himmler, they promised the Czechs that no German troops would come within 10 kilometers of the Czech border. And they didn't initially. I don't think there's any big doubt that Hitler always wanted that neighborhood. But again, the negotiations that Goering was trying to facilitate with Poland in 39 was, I don't know, back to Ukraine today, with the Danzig corridor. He wanted a land link to the German territories in eastern Poland. And the Poles were not closed off to negotiation, but the British had uh, assured the Poles, just like the French did, that they would come to their aid. And they were, if Germany did anything, they would come to the aid, so they didn't have to negotiate. And I think that's a big problem that has happened throughout. Look at Ukraine today. Um, Constantly, you have the big guys. America wasn't really involved at that time, but the British and the French were promising the Poles they would help if they stood firm and not negotiated. So they didn't, and then they got invaded, and nobody really came to help them, not even after the war. And Poland was completely surrendered to the Russians. No one in England or France moved a finger in order to help the Poles after having promised to do so. They have, in fact, both Poland and France declared war on Germany for invading Poland, but that's all they did. And then everyone sat for 6 months and did nothing, giving Germany a fairly decent excuse to start World War II in the West, because, well, we're sitting with France right on our border that started that have just declared war on us. So sooner or later they're going to come, or we're going to go. I think there would probably be a possibility for a peace settlement even there. Churchill certainly held out, but if no one had invaded anybody in 1940, I wonder how long that Cold War could just have lasted. I think it possibly could have been, but it's an untenable situation, obviously. And it's you look at the same thing that happened in the Ukraine. The thing that again, you're looking at a Ukrainian situation today. Not that I want to draw us into a current day situation, but Ukraine never had to happen. Very little, very few promises could have been made to have facilitated that not happening, and yet it did. And nobody wants to talk about it today on either side of the political spectrum or the media. The moment you start bringing up how the Western policies have sort of gave Putin all the excuses he need to do what he did in his backyard. Not that I'm excusing any aggressive war. Obviously, he did what he did, but why? You have to look at why do people do what they do, and nobody wants just the mere fact. If you ever wonder what's wrong with the Ukrainian situation, just look at the mere fact that nobody wants to talk about what came before or a negotiated settlement, which is by now probably impossible for Zelensky. He's going to lose his head either way. The Americans won't let him negotiate, and his right wingers in Ukraine won't let him negotiate either for different reasons. So, same thing with Poland. Poland stopped negotiating because they thought they were being promised that they would be saved, and what happened? Nothing. And it's maybe a little time for some restructuring of things. Anyway. So what did we get? I don't think he should negotiate. Zelensky? Well, he can't negotiate. Okay. How can he have an addiction like heroin while doing his tasks? Well, I mean, functioning alcoholics and functioning drug addicts. There's I used to do personal protection quite a bit in my life, and I also joke around with, say, the Rolling Stones that we babysat. Well, they're all a bunch of potheads, and everybody looks up to all these amazing artists and performers and musicians. Gee, all musicians seem to be on drugs, and they're all stoned out of their head or on. I mean, come on, Keith Richards was on everything. And they still make amazing music, and they sing, and they can perform, and they can do all these things. They also have a whole lot of people around them as a support system to make sure they don't die, or they get to where they need to go, or they found a way of handling an addiction and still be functional. There are people I know who were very functioning alcoholics. They'll drink all day, but they'll still do their job. Scary, because some of them are mechanics. You can find a balance for some of them, and sometimes they're very functional while they're on the drugs they're on. Goering was said by Karen's family that he would sometimes, when he was on his habit, and he would go off for a bit, and he came back after he took his fix, and he would be much more um, invigorated, and he was happy and talkative and friendly, and as it is with drug addicts, when you get your fix, they're all everything's fine for a while. It's when they don't get their fix, and it's when you crash, and that's uh, that's when the problems happen. But while people are on, they can to a certain degree um, function, which is what the function. And it's interesting when you say when we talk about Pervitin, we talk a lot about Pervitin for the German army. Well, actually, most armies had some sort of something to keep them awake for a long time. Tank chocolate. Pervitin was proven fairly early on. Yes, it'll give you just like any kind of drug that'll keep you awake for an extended period of time. Yeah, it'll keep you awake for an extended period of time, but it'll take you 3 times as long to recuperate and come back to some sort of normal. So the use of Pervitin was eventually discontinued because it was simply not a good. It was just not a good idea. Yes, it would keep you awake if you're sitting in your tank and you've got 24-hour battle going on. It'll keep you awake for a day or two or three. I think the longest I've been awake on maneuvers for just short of 6 days. And I can absolutely promise you, number one, I had a bunch of caffeine, bunch of ephedrine, lots of water, and on the 5th day, I'm guarantee you, I would swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw a pink elephant with headlights coming towards me. I saw an elephant with 2 headlights. I would swear to you. I wonder why people see UFOs in that state. Anyway, but I slept, 27 hours after that. They couldn't even wake me up in my bunk. They literally moved my bunk out as we were changing rooms when we get back from that one. So Pervitin, the same thing. You're up for a day or two, and then you have 3, 4, 5, 6 days where you're just a useless noodle. That's not productive. So they eventually started discontinuing that. John, why don't we give some Ukraine some nukes not to use as a deterrent? Well, see, that is part of the problem why the Russians are where they are today. Because before the Russian invasion, the Ukrainians advertised they were going to restart their nuclear weapons program. And the Russians, oddly enough, are very much not in favor of having Russian nuclear weapons pointed at them from right across the border. In fact, the Russians were so against having NATO weapons deployed right across the border, as we were when Khrushchev, he parked a whole bunch of ICBMs in Havana right across from Miami. We didn't like that either. And neither did he. Neither does Putin. And that's somewhat understandable. And promises have been made up and down ever since Reagan's time that if East Germany would be reunited with West Germany, NATO would not move east, and NATO have done nothing but move east ever since. The Baltics, Poland, Hungary, almost all countries east of Germany are now NATO countries against the verbal promise given. And we are building missile sites and silos. Yeah, we say they're anti-missile, but they can have a dual function as first strike weapons as well. The Russians start to get. I mean, it's just there's 2 sides to this story, and it's not that easy. But one thing is certain is the Ukrainian people are paying for it. And at this point in time, there's not going to be a peace anybody likes. There's just not. No one's going to get what. Yes, that is exactly it. Ukraine had nuclear weapons. The Russians promised that they wouldn't. That if Ukraine would not join NATO or a Western alliance, they wouldn't invade. But Ukraine did. I don't know if you know, but over the years before the Russian invasion, over 100,000 Ukrainian troops have been trained by NATO countries and armed by them, to the point where it was tacitly stated that Ukraine already was a NATO proxy. 2.5 years ago, Putin sent a letter to Biden saying he wanted a written guarantee that Ukraine was not going to join NATO. And Biden said, no, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So I'm not justifying what Russia did, but if you keep pushing for 15, 20 years, Russia said Ukraine is not joining NATO. They made it very clear they wouldn't allow that. So when we start talking about it, 2 days before the invasion, Ding Dong Vice President said, "We welcome Ukraine into NATO." You keep pushing, then someone's going to push back, and now we have a war that no one's going to get out of what they want. It's just very simple. The Russians are not going to give up the territories lightly. The Ukrainians are probably not going to be able to take them back because they will eventually run out of soldiers. So either we're going to have a negotiated settlement, sort of where we are, which case, if Zelensky negotiates with the Russians to give up the territories the Russians have already taken, the right in Ukraine is probably going to dangle him from a tree. That's what they seem to have promised to do, and all of the Americans are going to. Both parties and the administration are clearly against negotiating, and I don't understand why everyone is so much against at least opening the conversation. At least have a conversation, trying to figure out where we can meet in the middle, and what can we undo that we have done. You got to think there's a lot more to this on the ground than what we are being told in the media and the press by far. Of course, yeah, everybody makes money, and now you see the Chinese and the Russians are making deals. The Iranians and the Sauds are making deals. Everyone's making deals around America, except for America. And it was the Russians said some years ago that America is no longer capable of making a deal and sticking to it. And I think I love this country, but our foreign policy for the past 60 years, 70, 80, I mean, really, seriously, we really need to figure out who is actually doing what and why. But that's a whole different story. But I see the parallels to World War II quite easily. It's very simple to see where we were, what we have learned from history, and where we're going now. And yes, and the arms manufacturers are making money. Um, yes, it's actually you're actually right. It's interesting, and that's what we gave up. We gave up our missiles in Turkey. Yeah, the missile crisis started by us putting missiles in Turkey closer to Russia. So they put them in Havana closer to us, and then all hell broke loose, and all of them was dismantled. Now we're putting missiles in Poland, and we talked about putting missiles in ipso facto in Ukraine. We haven't learned anything, have we? I mean, it's just yeah. Why are there UPC codes on Swedish submarines? I don't know, but I would like to know more of. I don't know. Tell me more. Clark Graham and Goering. You know what? I never been in any kind of contact with him. I would actually somebody make a note of that. But yes, I have reached out to several of the fighting units in the Ukraine to come do an interview with them and talk about, especially the foreign volunteers, and see how and what and why they're going. Hey, Bardo, I'm very curious about why, how that's going, and so I'm waiting to hear back. And speaking of travel plans, leaving on May 1, flying into Prague, and then starting in Vienna, where the first day I'm there, and you guys will get a kick out of this, maybe, I have been contacted by the granddaughter of the last living veteran, it must be, the last living veteran of Assault Gun Brigade 236, who is still alive, photo album and all, and he will, I will spend some time with him because he's not well and he's getting old, so I'm going to hear his story, record it if capable, write it down, pulling the book back because I'm putting his story in a chapter for itself because he's the last. I mean, there's not a lot of veterans of World War World War II left, and not a lot that knew my family and fought with them. In fact, none I've ever heard of. So I'm really excited to meet with him and hear his story. How they, after the surrender, he him and his friend, they walked their way back through Russian lines back to Germany. So very keen on getting his story. That is must be, I would say, that must be one of the most important things I can do. And then there's all the other things. I have a meeting with BIG set up. Um, and we shall see what. Just curious to see if they'll share any of the photos from the tunnels. Would be nice. And then we'll make our way around Austria, Switzerland, France, um, coming down to Alpine National Line forts, which are really cool. Through France, going to go see Roger. Coming up through Holland, Denmark, Norway, back to Poland. A couple of things from Germany. And spend a lot of time in Poland, Hungary, make my way east. Um, Still working on details on the tour, by the way, just give you a little update. Problem with the tour is I have to rent, my bus driver fell off. So I have to rent a tour bus with a driver, which I'm getting offers for 2 weeks with a minibus with a driver. I'll find out how that's going to go and how that will affect the possibility of prices. And if it's still feasible within realm of what we can do, I'll post the suggested sites. I just want to see Caviac Jones is on board. Roger's on board. Roger said we'll see if we could find us one of the World War I forts to stay in. I thought I was going to be comfortable now, and I'm going to be feeling sleeping under the bus. And I was chatting with Caviac yesterday, and going to spend a little going to go see him, and probably I'm going to do some more. I got to go back to a couple of places at the Lisa sites. Paul found a really interesting looking location on satellite photo that none of us have any idea what it is. I'm going to look at that, and there's a couple of places I would like to get shot a little better. And then the East Wall, probably going to go there too. Gettysburg Museum. Gettysburg Museum. I haven't, but I think I reached out to them, Leo. I did reach out to them. I don't think I heard back. That's actually a good point. Drakiniefeld was in San Diego last week, and I missed him because I decided to hurt myself and pull my back. And now he is back. He was at a naval conference. So, but I am guessing that he went to film all the different battleships here and there. So I don't need to. Probably gonna do it anyway. But I'll wait till I come back. And I put out to my Hollywood agent to see if there was a network that would be interested in myself and Crystal Falcon going to dig up those 3 German tanks that she knows where it is. I don't know if you saw the live stream we did together, but she has a pinpointed location of where 3 German tanks were rolled into a hole and covered up with sand. And I thought that would be absolute brilliant idea to go dig them out. And I thought it would be a brilliant idea to see if we can find some network to pay for it. Isn't that the point of having having any kind of TV business? Is that somebody else gets to pay for you to do the fun things you want to do. And we'll see what we're doing in Jonastal, if anything. But I figure if we can dig up 3 German tanks, it doesn't matter what they are. If they're German World War II tanks, they will go to digging. Whatever it will cost to get them out of the hole will be compensated for what they're actually worth to any collectors, because there are so few of them. But I guess, we'll need some sort of machinery, some sort of something. Unlike the ones in Russia, you can just pull them out of the mud, I guess. But we'll see. I thought it would be an interesting little mini series to actually go dig out some tanks. Yeah, Roger could use a roommate. He has a whole barn. So is that your fourth barn explorer? Is that your fourth wife that is now telling you to not come home? I got those messages too. Something. I mean, it's got to be. It could be Hetzers. It could be bark forests. There was nothing specific, but whatever that was predominant of in 1945 at the end of the war. And I know we're all crossing fingers that it's a bunch of tigers or a panther or something, but that almost seems like it would be, nobody dares ever have the fantasy that they're gonna stick a shovel in the ground and come out with a tiger tank. It's kind of like the wet dream of every historian that it's gonna happen, but we all know it's probably not. I don't know. I haven't talked to them for a long time. All the people I knew at the Tank Museum in Münster seem to have disappeared and have been replaced by bureaucrats with no military experience. According to their website, it looks very sanitized and very sad, actually. But I guess the tanks are still the tanks. We'll see. Um, yeah, I'm sure they searched the tanks first. Oh, there might be some ammo in them, though. Um, yeah. Anyway, just wanted to have a little quick chat, and if any of you had any of the questions on Goering that where we came from, just shoot away. And see, some of you are making strange alliances in the chat. There will be no taking over the world without me, anyway. Just saying. Um, oh yeah, is it Palm Sunday? Isn't that next Sunday? Shows how religious I am. Um, well, I'm working, so I really don't know what day it is. I try not to pay attention to those things. But we are. I am working on 2 or 3 episodes of the West Wall that you do not know. Yes, I always need more pictures of Goering, Goebbels, and Himmler because those are the next 3 episodes that are coming up. Um, it's hard to say what Goering knew about. He was very much on top of things until the war really broke out. That's sort of when he seemed to have fallen out and off and became very braggadocious. And we can do this, we can do that. He was driving Milk crazy because he really couldn't make good of a lot of some of the promises. Although I will say that it wasn't Goering's fault about the promised airlift to Stalingrad, because it was not Goering who made that promise. Um, anyway, so what did he know? He was still a powerful man. He was still a man to be reckoned with. If it was an Air Force developed technology, he would probably have been informed. If it was a technology developed by somebody else, SS scientists, AG, he will. That's actually an interesting question. Did he know or not? If it was anything that would have come under his umbrella or developed by an umbrella that he knew of technology wise, he would have known, or at least he would have been presented a brief. Then you can ask yourself, was that a good day or a bad day? Did he read it? Did he understand the meaning? I mean, he was a smart man. No matter how he twisted and turned it, he was a very smart guy. But of course, when you're on drugs, as was an on and off, then you start not paying attention to details, not catching the importance of others. And yeah, he did set up the Gestapo and surveillance, but this was a technology developed within Germany, within German auspices, so it should have been come through channels to him. AEG was, I think was one of the people that would also sponsor him, so they might have informed him. He may have been asked for the funding. That's the interesting thing about what we know of the Bell, and I am meeting with Igor Witkowski when I get to Warsaw, by the way, see if he found anything new. Well, what we know was the AG was involved in it, the SS was involved in it, if certainly not fire, certainly security-wise at least, but also when it came to site management, setting up production facilities, they were. What else do we know? We don't know if there was an Air Force. There was a postal department, from what I can understand. There was a postal service component involvement, and we know the German postal service had their own nuclear reactor, test reactor, and Betatron, and they had von Aden whole setup and support by Hitler, and the postal service officers were seen at Jonastal, and they're also seen out in Silesia and out in the areas where of the Riese locations where the Bell was supposedly found. So now you have Postal Service, AGSS, not necessarily Air Force. So whether any of what it did came under him or not, it could have been kept as a secret. It could have been a need to know. If he was just written off, Hitler never really wrote him off until Bormann convinced him to at the end. And I actually don't think Goering tried to take over for Hitler. It was a way that towards the end, we'll get to that in the last Goering episode, of he wasn't trying to usurp Hitler towards the end. It was the way Bormann presented the information to him that caused that. But we'll see. I'll ask Igor when I see him. He knows more about that than anyone else, really. Okay, I'll be honest and say I don't think Goering should have been sentenced to death. Maybe life. I don't think any of them should have been sentenced to death for the very reason that post-war historians for decades after would have benefited from being able to sit down and talk to them about what really happened. And there was so much horse trading and false information planted and given during that trial, and horse trading between the judges, the French, the British, the Russians, Americans, that it was not, nothing can really be said to be a fair trial. Plus, they were all convicted by laws enacted after the deed, which is another something you can't do. They were going to hang these dudes, the end. It was as much of a show trial as you'll ever have, as you'll see Stalin's done, and as you see recently here. It was what it was. And it was not about arriving at the facts or the truth. And one would say that what come to light later, Speer most certainly should have hanged. But Goering, some of the testimony against him was taken out of context. Or again, if it was taken out of a man who was on drugs, ranting on about something, he did what he did, but it would have been nice to have kept him alive a lot longer to find out exactly what that was in an honest. I actually, Tyrone, yes, I actually think they were very much in a hurry to just hang them, to shut them up, because they didn't really want anybody else. Just look at what happened to Hess, whatever that was that happened to Hess. Because we still don't exactly know. If there's one person that should not have done a day in jail, it was Rudolf Hess. He risked his own life at, 42 or some high age, to fly to England to negotiate peace. And when he figured out he failed, he tried to kill himself. And the British used all sorts of drugs on him, accordingly, to try to get him to talk about what he knew. But Hess tried to bring peace. He put his life on the line to try to bring, even if whether it was a sanctioned mission by Hitler or not, or it was a way to succumb, get around Hitler and Churchill to some way. If Hitler and Churchill were out of the way, you probably had an easier way of getting to a peaceful solution. And I think at least Hess tried. So the reason why they locked him up forever is that ain't right. That is absolutely not right. But that's the way it was. Very, very little of that was fair. I mean, was it Streicher, the guy that had written for the Sturmer way before the war. He was a propagandist. He had been had a falling out with Hitler in 37, 38, and was kicked out of all of his offices. And he was sitting in his house writing his memoirs. It had nothing to do with the war. I might not have been Stryker, but I think it was. He had written propaganda in the 30s. And yeah, he was unrepentant anti-Semite and so on and so forth. But he hadn't done anything. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't. Had no role during the war at all. And said, yeah, he wrote propaganda about how much he hated this and that and the other. Fair, but they hanged him, and this is again the wrong signal to send. You can't just go after people for what they said or what they believe. Well, I say now. I guess you can now. And certainly, and the crime, and again, I mean, you're right. And Hitler, way up until the dawn of war, never wanted a war with Britain, and he reached out a lot of times. Again, if we hadn't had Goering not Goering, sorry, Churchill absolutely did not want to do a deal. I think Churchill wanted to go to war for whatever reason, and I think there's a lot of baggage in Churchill's background leading to that. Plus, you can also look at before the war. Why were there Jewish bankers funding Hitler coming? I mean, no one saw where this was going to go exactly. I don't even think Hitler quite saw where things went. You should be very concerned about Hess's confession, because they tortured him for a very long time, and he even said that when they wrote him, Hess was the last commander of Auschwitz. They tortured him like they did with a lot of people, and there was a lot of the Germans that was tortured into confessions, and he was one of them. And he sat next to a doctor who was put in chains in a van at the back of a truck and driven from the prison where he was held to Nuremberg, and he sat next to a German doctor and he told him. So there's plenty of people that knew what happened to him. And again, we're looking at admissions under duress. They don't hold up in court, do they? Well, they do in dictatorships, I guess. I mean, there's plenty of Stalin's victims that had their confession signed in literally their own blood. So, again, we can draw parallels to what has happened here recently, but that is not what we're here for. But yeah, there's a lot of when you outlaw an organization like the SS and the Waffen-SS, blanket. Not all SS men, not all Waffen-SS men had done anything wrong, but now you blanket deem that an organization as a whole is illegal. I mean, it's the same thing as saying, well, everyone in the EU Parliament are now a war criminal. Not all of them are, but it would never boil down into Judge Jackson never wanted to do the blanket of organizations. And I think that would have been a wise choice. And then again, the Waffen-SS was redeemed 10 years later when that was revoked. And they didn't do it with the general staff. They didn't do it with a lot of the military staff organizations, because it just led to a whole lot of individual slaughter and a whole lot of individuals that were murdered for deeds that they had nothing to do with. Same thing at Nuremberg. They accused the Waffen-SS men of having been guards at the various concentration camps, which they were not. There was Allgemeine SS. or various auxiliary guards. The Waffen-SS had nothing to do with that. But again, they were sentenced for it. The Germans were also sentenced for the Katyn massacre, which we know the Russians did. They admitted that readily. Movies have been made on it. So there's a lot of problems with that trial. And like I said, I would love to retry the Nuremberg trials based on all information that we now have, and based on having defense attorneys given all that information, because the Allies didn't give the defense attorneys anything that they didn't want them to have. Didn't even give them access to witnesses. Denied hundreds of witnesses that they wanted to call. Nobody wanted the truth to come out, especially the Russians, because we all know the Russians did a deal with Germany, and they were could be accused of aggressive war as well. Finland. It's interesting enough, the Canadians never signed on to the Nuremberg trials. They never did want to have anything to do with it, which is probably the smart thing. No one was really that particularly interested, except Judge Jackson really wanted to do it because he thought it should be done as an example. But none of the Allies were particularly interested. I mean, everyone was busy killing the people they caught that they didn't like. But the Russians thought it should be done. Jackson thought it should be done. Eventually, everyone else sort of, well, the British and the French followed suit. That's what Churchill lived a really interesting life in his early life as well, and I think that he's an interesting person that should be done as well. I think his decisions as he got older became worse, but we all have those days. So anyway, did I sort of answer what I said I would? All right. Anyway, don't want to ruin all your Sunday because some of you have a life to do, and I have to go back to the West Wall. And believe you, the West Wall is not at all the flimsy little thing that you thought it would. And Hitler didn't actually begin the West Wall. It was begun before him. So now I've given away a little bit of the secrets in there. And Peter, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys. I really do. And I hope you know that if it hadn't been for all the interactions, I wouldn't be doing this. I don't think I did. I just think making videos is, in this day and age, a better way of telling history than it is to write books that nobody can find time to read. And despite all the battles with YouTube and monetization and all the other weird hating people in the world, I really appreciate you guys are here, and it's really nice to see so many of you both here and for the Goering episode, because that took a lot out of me. It's a lot easier to go through a battlefield and point to cool things than it is to pull out things that have never been photoed. But anyway, I'm gonna let you go, and thank you all so much. We'll do another live before I leave, obviously. Something will come up next week. And when I am in Europe, I will endeavor to try to do more live episodes from wherever I happen to be. Not going to be very helpful to all my patriotic Americans here, because you're probably going to be sleeping at that time. But for those in the rest of the world who's up at that time, I'm going to try to do some live stuff, because I think it could be fun. I'll try to do some live stuff from Ukraine as well, because that seems like it'd be interesting. What could possibly go wrong there? Anyway, you guys have a wonderful weekend. Going to be a couple of questions coming up on the channel for you to answer. And thank you so much for being here and for watching and for supporting and for helping. It is sort of the only thing that makes this possible. And is it Palm Sunday? I really did think that was next Sunday, but what do I know? I guess I'm going to have to go eat fish now. You eat fish on Palm Sunday, don't you?